Throughout Australian history, there are many instances of inequality. However, there are none quite as blatant as the ill treatment caused by the hands of the British settlers towards the Indigenous members of Australia. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples had inhabited most areas of the Australian continent long before the arrival of European settlers. Their lifestyles and cultural traditions differed from region to region, as well their languages and dialects. In 1770, Englishman Captain James Cook extended his voyage to chart the east coast of Australia and to claim it for the British Crown. After the discovery, Britain decided to use this new charted land as a penal colony. On 26 January 1788, the first fleet of 11 ships had successfully arrived in Sydney Harbour, bearing approximately 1,500 people. Half of these people were convicts. From this time, 1788, to the year 1868, about 160,000 men and women were introduced to Australia as convicts. During this period of time, Indigenous Australians were treated callously and had suffered enormously from this injustice.
British convicts misunderstood Indigenous Australians. Over many years, the settlers tortured, humiliated, and abused the native people. For generations, Aboriginals have struggled to rebuild their lives that were so tormented and belittled. With no sense of power, they had nowhere to turn. Because of the differences in lifestyle, Indigenous peoples were rejected by the white hegemonic group of society. In the hope of conforming their ways of life to be more like the hegemonic group of society, children were removed from their homes and were either adopted out or rehomed into institutionalized facilities. These facilities were specifically built to teach Indigenous children the ways considered appropriate to the British settlers. It has only recently come to our attention that these facilities were ravished with many forms of abuse. Given these details, it is no wonder why people of Indigenous descent wanted an apology. An apology from the government was vital for the Indigenous members of our nation to feel like the events had been acknowledged. This small step allows the Indigenous community to move forward in the right direction. The Australian public has been aware of the wrongdoings for quite some time, and without the government's involvement, they chose to recognise the past. In 1998, these citizens decided to put the 26th of May aside each year to acknowledge the Indigenous mistreatment caused at the hands of the people from previous generations. Finally, our government stepped up to the challenge, and on the 13th of February 2008, they acknowledged the horrific and traumatic turn of events that had transpired to the Indigenous members of Australia. Kevin Rudd, our current Prime Minister, apologised.
Today we honour the Indigenous people. We reflect on their past mistreatment. We reflect in particular on the mistreatment of those who were stolen generations. We apologise especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, their communities and their country.
Kevin Rudd's sorry speech has created controversy and heated debates, as some Australian people believe it isn't our government that should be apologising, whilst others believe that the apology was pointless. There are many views surrounding the sorry speech, but in any case, the official apology was given and is another small step towards reconciliation.
Shannon and I took the time to visit Amaru Kindergarten this week to discover some ideas that could be modified for a primary school classroom context. We discussed these ideas with director and teacher Ruth Hurley.
Ruth, what do you believe makes up Aboriginal collective identity?
Well, sort of the collective identity, a lot of people tend to think that Aboriginal people are all the same, when in actual fact they come from very different backgrounds and they have different dialects, they have different sort of cultural mores which may subtly change from one mob to another. You know, what happens up in the bush country may be different to what happens down in the plains. The one thing that does give them their collective identity is the past, and the sort of what happened in the past with the children being taken away. It has a profound effect upon every Indigenous person. Somewhere in their past, you'll find that something has happened.
In your experience as the Indigenous Centres Director, how has the community accepted the kindergarten, and have you experienced any prejudice towards the kindy?
In society, there is a lot of prejudice, but it's a very subtle prejudice. Admittedly, people say, "Oh no, it's fine," but it'll be that sort of little unconscious reaction that people have when you say it's Indigenous or something, because they have this preconception of what it will be to be Indigenous. I don't see the kids as Indigenous. I see them as children.
I have noticed there are various techniques and teaching strategies used throughout the kindy. The classroom is both aesthetically pleasing to all members of the community and do not just depict any single hegemonic view, such as displaying all three